Welcome to What Would Sabrina Say? I'm Sabrina Dong, and I'm excited you're joining me today. In this podcast, I dive into mental health topics on relationships and overall well-being. With over 20 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker, I share insights and invite expert guests who are passionate about making a positive difference. I started this podcast because I was frustrated with the often misleading or recycled information in social media involving self-help and the mental health field. My goal is to provide you with genuine, useful content that's educational and informative. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you find our conversations both enlightening and empowering. I'm glad you're here. Hi, welcome to What Would Sabrina Say? I'm your host, Sabrina Dong. Here today on this episode, we're talking about a great coping skills app and tool for people to use every day. And we have the creator and founder as well, Jack Wilson, licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist out in Michigan. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jack.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
And I also have joining us today, Eric Malcolm, who helped with the creation of the app. Eric, if you'd like to also introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Yeah. Eric Malcolm. I'm a software engineer. I help build the mobile app, mental health advocate and stuff like that. That's about it.
Great. Thanks for joining. Just wanted to get started on how this app developed for you and where this all started, how the idea came about.
Well, as a therapist, many times I would be asked for coping skills. And typically that would mean coming up with something, brainstorming, coming up with something right on the spot and try to make it work, and that'd be it. But I decided that it would make sense to actually create a coping skill list to share with clients. And then I discovered that DBT actually has been using what I now refer to as named and defined coping skill. And it made sense to me that, well, why should people who are not DBT clients but would still benefit this don't have access to a published list of named and defined coping skills? So I went about creating that. And then one of my younger clients said, this should be an app. And I thought that sounded like a good idea. So I set about looking for somebody who could help me with that. And I found Eric. And Eric has entered into this project with lots of enthusiasm and skill and expertise. And here we are.
That's great. And Jack, sounds like you've brought in your 30 plus years of clinical expertise and working with clients and creating this app. So it's really developed specifically for people and helping with coping day to day. But if you wanted to maybe give an example of what it could be used for.
Well, just to give you a little more of an understanding, first of all, the concept of coping skills, initially it's a generic kind of term that I never really thought about specifically. And I think maybe that's the way many people use it. But when I discovered that there is actually kind of a format for a named and defined coping skill, I decided to start thinking about, well, how does that work? And then I realized that as I thought about it, I realized that we all naturally use coping skills. Whenever we have a problem that we have been confronted with, and we have to come up with a response. And these coping skills typically are created and applied on the spot. Sometimes they're remembered, but rarely are they named. So these natural coping skills usually occur in our self-talk and sometimes occur in a discussion with another person. After discovering that DBT actually does this, and then I went ahead and created some coping skill sets, I began to share them with my clients. And this was probably back in 2017, so it's been a while. And through that process, I would get feedback. I would discuss the coping skill idea with my clients, and we'd see how it works. We'd kind of follow the process. And I began sharing it with my colleagues and began getting other suggestions and slowly developed a format for what I called the coping skill set. And I initially started out with what I called coping skills for adults and then began to expand that into other sets. and came up with coping skills for couples, and then coping skills for parents. And then that followed coping skills for kids, and then coping skills for teens. And then we began expanding beyond that so that we could provide coping skills for more specific kinds of issues. And so I began, rather, because this is earlier before I met Eric. Decided to come up, because all those coping skills kind of fit with the family structure. So I came up with coping skills for specific life circumstances, like chronic pain, coping skills for chronic pain, for dating, for pregnancy, for losing weight, for not smoking. Ended up with 25 different coping skill sets. And as we began to think about how can we make this into an app, obviously we had to start somewhere. So we came up with the coping skills for adults, and we actually launched it back in September. So we've been offering it ever since then. And so far we're up to about almost 900 downloads without doing any advertising. We're getting the word out there. Mostly I've used taking advantage of being a LinkedIn member, expanding my contacts and offering the app to each new contact. And I've had a pretty good response so far. So that's kind of where we're at with getting the app out there.
So when you talk about coping skills, I'm just wondering if you can give people examples, like, is there visuals? Is it exercises? The definitions? And also too, if you want to jump in, Eric, on like what people will find on the app, and that would be helpful.
We did start with the same model that DBT uses, which typically is a logical positive statement that they give to their clients as guidelines, to use when they're in stress or having difficulty. And so we didn't try to do anything visual or exercise-wise. Instead, we would offer, at least I would, when I was developing this, offer my coping skills ideas and talk about how the individual can apply it to their own specific needs. And then they would try it out, see if it worked, whether we had to modify it in some way. But the idea was to give them something to, when they are caught up in negative self-talk, to have a way to counteract that negative self-talk with a more optimistic or positive statement or a practical solution or something like that. And just kind of learned as I went, and people did typically respond well, and it's just grown from there. Now, one of the things that I would typically do, though, is kind of orient the person, to the concept of self-talk, because coping skills are typically used in our self-talk. I mean, we can come up with a coping skill in a discussion with somebody, like a therapist, or we can read about something and we can adopt it that way. But typically still people have to apply their method of coping with whatever their problem is in their own thinking process, which I like to refer to as self-talk. So I would start out with a client who I wanted to introduce this topic to and say, I want to start out by offering you an interesting idea. It has to do with what I like to think of as your basic psychology. We all have a conversation in our own head all the time. At any given time, there may be any number of thoughts that you have in your internal conversation. It's useful to organize all those many thoughts into 3 categories: positive thinking, negative thinking, and neutral thinking. And then I would explain the difference between those. Neutral thinking has to do with basically thinking about something that has no emotional involvement. Positive thinking typically has to do with optimistic feelings about things, or a logical idea, or sense of confidence in what you're doing. Negative self-talk has to do with, typically, it could be where you're angry, or maybe with other people, or maybe you don't have any confidence in yourself. You may make self-talk statements like, I can't do anything right. I fail at everything. I can't do anything right. Nobody likes me. All those kinds of self-deprecating kinds of thoughts that people get caught up in. And so then I said, now with this concept, you can make a distinction, an easy distinction between positive, negative, and neutral thinking or self-talk. and and from that point on, I talk about any time that you realize that you're engaged in negative self-talk, then this may well be to your advantage to interrupt it. But that's easier said than done because often coping skills are very intrusive, they're repetitive, and it's hard to turn them off. So you need tools to help you with that. And the tool that works best, from my point of view, is something called coping skills. And then I'll go ahead and give them examples of coping skills.
Great. I was wondering too, Eric, what the experience was like for you and what your goal or focus was in developing the app.
Yeah, for sure. So one of my main goals in developing the app was creating a, easy to use, sort of experience for, mostly what Jack was talking about, right? Just like, name defined coping skills quick, right? So like currently you open up the app, and it'll show you a list of 50 named and defined coping skills that are focused for adults and just general everyday life sort of stuff. And then it just kind of groups all those together. There's another screen that has coping methods, which provides, all the skills and stuff like that organized by different functions, right? And the ease of use of that and being able to make it, free for anybody to be able to use was my main goals.
So wanting it to be accessible, easy to
Yeah,
use, easy for people to
exactly.
find those coping tools, easy to find the definitions or terms.
Yep.
And I see that it's
Yeah.
very easy to scroll through too and quick to turn to each section.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And our main sort of sections right now in the app are, coping skills, coping methods, coping strategies, and then we have different scenarios that, people might be going through that they can, reference, okay, if you use this method, do this, do that, and then just a lot of references, definitions of the different stuff that they may or may not understand or just want to go deeper into.
Right. Learning more about that skill or tool. Jack, I was wondering what outcome are you looking for people to use this app? So we talked about self-talk being intrusive. What are you hoping that people can do in using the coping skills on the app?
Well, first of all, I think most people will acknowledge that self-talk, I'm sorry, negative self-talk is a common affliction that we all kind of suffer with, and it can prolong anger, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. And when we get caught up with that, a lot of times we may not recognize it's happening initially, or when we do, we don't know what to do about it. Or we may get defensive or whatever. But what I want to do with the app is help people realize that when they do get caught up in negative self-talk, there is a way to counteract that by adopting some coping skills. So if they have the app and they know they do have that type of problem, they get angry easily, that type of thing, then by becoming familiar with the app, they can identify some coping skills that are helpful for them. And I like to suggest that they adopt those skills so they actually learn them. Then as time goes on, they may look for other skills, for other concerns or issues. So that kind of applies to just anybody at any time who realizes they're having a hard time managing their negative self-talk. But we also know that some people will have a persistent problem that will be ongoing, a chronic anxiety, for example, or something like that. So we realize that, well, we have to offer people something for dealing with those chronic issues. So that is what the coping strategies are for. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it yet, but the coping strategies actually provide a step-by-step process that you can adopt as your strategy for managing your anxiety or your panic attacks or your depression, whatever it is for you. And there's about 10 different examples of coping strategies in the app. And they're actually there to give examples of how you can develop a step-by-step response to a persistent problem. So along with that, we've included a template and even an AI prompt that people can use to develop their own customized coping strategy. And so our hope is that people, once they become familiar with that, they'll begin doing that. So far in my actual practice, I've helped my clients do that. But typically I'm taking the lead. To be honest, I haven't had anyone actually say, I ran with this. I did the AI prompt. I came up with this great strategy. So I'm still looking for that.
I was wondering if you could share quickly how clinicians can use this in the practice. You gave examples of how you can introduce it and talk about it, but what are some ways? Would it be for home practice? Would there be follow-up? Just giving some examples of how the app can be used.
Yeah, I kind of see the app for therapists. I see the app as a resource that they can share with clients if they recognize that a client does have a chronic problem with anxiety, say, and they want to help that person develop a strategy for managing that. Then they would offer the app as a tool to help them develop that, as opposed to having do it from scratch. It's pretty structured. Like the names of all the coping skills. We didn't have any DSM-5 to come up with those names. So obviously they were made up based on what makes sense. The first one, the interruption skill. Well, that makes sense because when you are realizing that you're engaged in negative self-talk, the first thing ideally that you would do is interrupt it and then try to refocus on something else. So it made sense that the very first skill on the list is the interrupt skill. There's 50 different skills. What I often suggest to clients is go through the list, find 4 or 5 that you think would be helpful for you, and then try them out. So that would be something any therapist could do with their clients. And then talk to them about it at the next session. How did that work? Did that help? Maybe is there another skill that you would maybe respond to better? The reason for the coping methods is it organizes all 50 skills into 10 categories. So that if you're struggling with anxiety, you can look at the calming strategy. That provides about 4 or 5 different coping skills that help somebody who typically is tense and needs to learn how to calm down and be relaxed. And then they can choose between them and try them out and see if they work.
That's great. Thank you for that example and walking us through how, it could be used for anyone day to day and not necessarily, have to accompany therapy, but
Right.
it can certainly be used with the therapist checking in, following up and
Mhm.
asking how it's going, and giving that as a tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so our intent now is to expand our app so it won't just be limited to coping skills for adults. Like I said, we have 25 different coping skill sets, with skills for couples, parents, etc. And so our challenge has been how to make those available. Initially, we thought we might put out, 25 different apps, which probably wasn't very practical. So we've since come up with the idea of creating, making each coping skill set a module that will be available in the basic app. And the coping skills for adults will be the basic app, and it will come with the app for free. The others, people can browse and see which ones they might be interested in, and then they can turn them on, but by paying a nominal fee. And that's what we're working on right now.
Wow, that's great. People will be able to use your app for coping right in the moment. That's when people are needing something, right? In that
Yeah.
time, that current present time. So it's so great to have that available.
Yeah, we're hoping that it will be that practical resource, as you described, right in the moment. You just pull out your phone and you bring up the app, and there it is. And if you're feeling distress, maybe it can even help you immediately in the moment.
Right. And a great tool even for couples if they, downloaded this each, right? The
Yeah.
app and were able
Yeah.
to work on it together.
Yeah. And we think too that as indicated by the first set of modules that I described, the skills for couples, for parents, for kids, for teens, we might even be able to offer like a family package or something for a family that's having difficulties with behaviors and just getting along. And they might benefit as a family by having one module for each that would apply to their needs. And I'm excited for some of the other potential for some of the other apps. For example, when we get to coping skills for chronic pain, as a therapist, I've worked a lot with people who have chronic pain. And by definition, they've had lots of treatment, but the treatment is not taking care of the chronic pain. They still suffer with it. So what do? They need alternative ideas. I've become intrigued with the idea of using bilateral stimulation, where people chant or use other kinds of ways of using rhythm or humming or different ways that they can use to manage that pain that the medicine isn't helping them with. So I'm pretty excited about developing that concept. This is more than just reading some ideas. It's giving you ideas that you can actually do things, like the tapping thing. And apparently that's kind of connected with EMDR. That's bilateral stimulation. So I'm interested in that concept and how we can apply that. And we're working hard at it. We hope to have at least couples, parents, kids, and teens out pretty soon.
Great. I was wondering where people would be able to reach um, you, Jack and Eric, if they're wanting to know more information about the app and how to access it or for more information and resources. Is there a website or
Yep.
how they can connect with you?
CopingSkillsApps.com. So it's pretty simple. CopingSkillsApps.com. Did I say that right, Eric?
Yep. CopingSkillsApp.com or CopingSkillsApps.com. Either one will take you to us. Yeah. And feel free to connect with us on different social media where we can reach out. We got contact form on the website, contact form within the app.
Great. And are you open to, if people have feedback to give you on the app
For sure.
or just sharing their experience to you?
As I have reached out to my LinkedIn connections, I've invited every one of them, to send feedback. That's how we met you, was through that process. And you responded by saying, hey, would you like to be on a podcast? And I've been getting a lot of responses from the many therapists who I've been contacting through this process. Some giving good ideas, some showing interest. I'm learning from others who actually are also developing apps. So it's really been an interesting experience for me, reaching out to basically, I'm up to 4,500 connections now. So.
I know we're talking about the act today, Jack, but just about yourself and other resources that you might have for people if they're interested in terms of books or.
Yeah, our website does have a products section, and it does identify. We have, in fact, all those coping skill sets that I mentioned are available as PDFs. And
Hey, great.
yeah, and we also I wrote a book called Coping Skills for Everyday Life, and it's featured on the app as well. It's available on Amazon. It's self-published, but it's available on Amazon.
Yeah, and you could get to it through the site as well to find it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, both of you, Eric and Jack, for your time today and joining me to talk about the Coping Skills app. And so excited to hear about already next steps for it and plans. And I'm excited to share with others and seeing just such benefits and how it can help in that present moment tools and develop step-by-step action plan, right? And strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for your time. I'd love to have you back on and share any updates.
Yeah, well,
awesome. Thank
be
you.
very
Thanks
interested
for having
in
us.
it. Yeah, thanks.
And congrats on it too, as well.